Good morning and welcome. Welcome to everybody here in the room, behind and in front of the cameras. I am Sarah Wijns. I'm the director of the Middelheimmuseum, and it is my great pleasure and honor to introduce to you today the moderator of this artist conversation, Sandrine Colard, who is also the guest curator of our summer's exhibition at the Middelheimmuseum, The Important Moment of Congoville. Sandrine is a Belgian Congolese curator, writer, and scholar. She's a doctor in African art history and works both in Brussels and New York. As a curator, her focus has been on photography and portraiture before expanding to contemporary art at large, with projects such as the 6th Lubumbashi Biennial in 2019. She lectures frequently and internationally, and is the author of multiple publications. The new book she's working on deals with the history of photography of colonial Congo until the 1960s. And Sandrine, I welcome you warmly again amongst us today, and I would like to ask you to please introduce our other guests.
Thank you, Sarah. I will start with another round of thanks. Thank you to Sarah, thank you to Middelheim, thank you to Peter Boons for the possibility and the opportunity to create this exhibition all together. And we are very lucky to have with us sitting here today 2 of the 15 artists gathered in the exhibition Congoville. We have Pélagie Gbaguidi and Sammy Baloji, and I will make a short introduction of you two, and I'm sure that throughout the conversation the full spectrum of both your amazing practices will come through. So Pélagie was born in Dakar, Senegal, from parents of Benin origins. You studied at the School of Fine Arts in Liège, and you stayed in Belgium ever since, living and working in Brussels or near Brussels. And you regularly define yourself as a contemporary griot. I'm sure we'll get a chance to talk about what you mean by that in the course of the conversation. Your practice really spans many different media, painting, drawings, installations, all around you here in the piece that you show. And the topics that your practice is usually about is the musings on collective and individual memory, the misuse of history, the deconstruction of stereotype, but also the rewriting of history and the rewriting of meta-narratives. Sammy Baloji was born in Lubumbashi, in the well-known province of Katanga in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. You studied computer science and information at the University of Lubumbashi, and you started with photography, but I think it's fair now to say that you're also expanded to a lot of different media, sculptures, installation. And you work, I think at the core of your practice, we can say that we have a rework on the memory and the history of the Congo, and also, of course, of the colonial history that Belgium and the Congo shares up to this day. So it is my great pleasure to be in discussion with you two today, and we are gathered in the auditorium, in one auditorium of the University of Antwerp, formerly the Colonial College. It's probably something that a lot of people ignores, but we'll get into that. And it is one of the most intact rooms here in this building, with a lot of preserved features. We see Congolese wood all over the room. We see even the symbol of what used to be the Congo Free State and then the Belgian Congo with a star in front of us. So it's a very, very charged place from which to speak today. And it's also, of course, very interesting to sit here because the existence of this school and the survival of this school within what is today the University of Antwerp, the proximity of this school with the Middelheimmuseum, their entangled history, were really the starting points of the exhibition that I have entitled Congoville. And to give this name, Congoville was really a way to recognize the innumerable traces of colonial traces that surround us, not only in Antwerp, but really on a national level here in Belgium. And so it was a way to recognize that, to give a name to that urban layer, but also to recognize that beyond that built heritage, other things really constitute this unseen city around us, which are the mentalities that we have inherited as a society from the colonial time period, and that still have impacts. Recently, we have spoken most about monuments and how they keep distilling into our society these imperial ideas, but there are many different things also in the city. And then, of course, the presence of the Congolese and African populations in Belgium, which are, of course, probably the most component of this Congoville. So the city of, beyond the Middelheim, of course, the city of Antwerp is a very important pole of this national Congoville, since the harbor was really the first contact zone with the colony for a very long time. So we'll see how the site here, and then more largely Antwerp, and then on a national level, Belgium is really the site of this unseen city of Congoville. So this is my take of the concept I came up with, but first question for both of you would be, when I extended this invitation, how did this idea resonated with you? And also, when you worked on your piece and when we were in discussion, has it evolved over time? So, Pélagie, would you mind addressing this?
Yes. Congoville resonates as a collective memory, still alive as an organ. Created by the Belgian society. I mean that I'm talking about the colonial past, which has become an artifact, always present, silent, not often recognized, but which creates a collective trauma. So when I received the invitation to participate in Congoville, it made me think the collective trauma and how to look at it today.
Very interesting. Sammy, how did Congoville resonate with you, and has it changed over time?
But at first, when I heard Congoville, I thought that it was kind of provoking, in a way that is it a project of a sort of Congoville here in Brussels or in Belgium? Did I heard about it, and were our plans or something like that? But then I found it really interesting as a matter that needs to be thought and really discussed. And one of the pieces which is in part of the exhibition, actually, it's really started from elements that connect really Congo to Belgium today, and this is the project titled Untitled, actually.
Yeah, I have to say that it's true when you say it sounds provoking. The idea was to be thought-provoking, because of course the sound of the name was meant to remind people of the names given to cities in the Congo, right? Usually, cities like Leopoldville or Stanleyville were cities that have been founded or at least conquered by colonial figures. And of course, the idea was to see how the remnants and the traces of colonialism were not only present in the Congo, but were really present here in 21st century Europe, and that this is something that we need to address. So we have 15 artists, and along this title of Congoville, a sort of parallel but really embedded concept that I have for this exhibition was the idea of the black flaneur, which, if people aren't familiar with the term, is a very important figure in the development of European cities in the 19th century. It's actually a term that was coined by Charles Baudelaire, the famous French poet, and it was really for him a way to describe this sort of new urbanites, a new sort of urban subjectivity of people who were living now in a radically transformed city. It's the time when Paris became this airy city with wide boulevards, when you could really stroll around and take in the city as a spectacle with its total transformation through capitalism, through industrialization, and of course through imperialism as well. The sort of exotic, quote-unquote exotic elements that were arriving in the city at that time because of colonialism was an integral part of that new spectacle of the city. So of course, tweaking this idea by coining the idea of the black flaneur was really more a way to really realize how the public space has been shaped toward one type of subjectivity, and really asking ourselves how it is to live as a multicultural city nowadays in these same cities when a lot of the public space is still shaped around that 19th century flaneur. And someone who addressed that really well is W.E.B. Du Bois, the African-American thinker, and he talked about double consciousness. And this is actually a very simple term to explain how, as a African descendant living in the Western world, you are very often confronted to this sort of internal conflict where you live there, you have made your home there, but at the same time, very often, and it's something that's very vivid in some works and in the conversation we had with monuments, you also feel aggressed by this public space. And so some works in the exhibition speak precisely about that, and I'm thinking about Hank Willis Thomas' piece, The Diptychs, that we see that really is about this double reading that the public space can receive. And so I was just curious to ask you, Pélagie and Sammy, if you could share with us elements in the Belgian cities, in Antwerp, or on the site of Middelheim, that has ever given you that experience of double consciousness, of this internal conflict.
So I can answer with something which is very personal. In a relation of the double consonants, I knew when I arrived in France that I should not divide myself to answer to a category. When society tacitly asked me to choose where I am belonged, I had to make a block, be myself. Later, I broadened my interpretation of identity. I discovered that I practice ubiquity. Here and there, with a great ears, it means to be here with you, but to be linked with the trees, or to be here, but linked with the shadows, or to be here, but linked with the ancestors. What Du Bois calls double consciousness is something I inherited from my parents or from my culture, so as a richness, but not as a conflict.
This is very interesting.
What troubled me was the injustice and the racism that were perhaps early on inscribed as a subject of conflict. I practice art to better understand society, people, and the world.
I love this idea of living that double consciousness as a richness, and I think that's something extremely important, because very often you are forced into describing your experience as that of only conflict, when in fact it could be very much a very rich experience. Sammy?
Yeah,
Anything in the landscape, the cityscape, that has ever struck you as this double consciousness trigger?
I don't know, but I mean, working on the colonial history started already in Lubumbashi, and this came also with the fact that, just as Pélagie was talking about the trauma, I think that in Congo there's also this kind of collective amnesia, and that, and it's part of a Congolese landscape in a way, and I've been raised in this kind of silence in a way that it's also connected to all we've been through politically speaking. And so my discovery with archives in a way kind of triggered already this kind of absence of a memory that we need to share, that we need also to kind of analyze in a way in order to evolve. I think the work of Pélagie is talking a lot about education and the way of belonging to the world. And I think that as long as there's nothing said about it, we don't know where we're coming from and we don't know where we're going. So when I arrived also in Belgium, my first time was, I was invited at the Museum, and I would say like the way that I discovered those archives in Congo, it was in an abandoned mining company where I had a direct, in a way, like conversation with photographs that were abandoned in a but again, here in Brussels, I was in a way guided by scientists who kind of, and even the archives themselves were really informing a lot about the colonial, or even on the colonial process itself of colonization, than on the subject that were part of the studies or the missions that were taken by colonizers in a way. So this is one thing, and this is where I wanted to kind of create a sort of distance between the scientists and the archives themselves, and try also to combine, I mean, the materials that I discovered in Brussels and combine it with, or even confront it with this, I would say like a social amnesia, or like a collective amnesia in Congo. So I brought those archives in Congo, and I started to kind of ask people to talk about, you know, an expedition that happened in 1898, where they tried to actually create borders between Katanga and the Rhodesia, actually. And it was made by Le Maire, Charles Le Maire, who was a captain in a way. So I started to kind of revisiting the place where he went with his expeditions, and tried to kind of show pictures to local communities in order to see if they remember something. And I knew that I was dealing with just the colonial, I mean, like the collective memory. It's not about like having proofs or whatever, but it's really the way that they learn from their ancestors or parents about the story that I have actually as fact coming from
I think it's very interesting that you mentioned that you can have that experience already in the Congo, this sort of double consciousness experience. And of course, the mentioning of the museum, the African Museum, I'm sure is that place of the internal conflict for a lot of different people. So two important axes, and you both already touched on that a little. Your works actually represent two important axes in the show, namely commemoration also in monuments, but not only. And then Pélagie, you really, in your work, we really have this idea of education and transmission. And I would like to start with you with this second idea, and with the idea of education and transmission. We are sitting here in a room that was really one of the engineering places of the colonial mind, and the education that was received within these walls were really meant to prepare people to become colonial administrators, to perpetuate a domination over the Congolese based on this, hierarchy of races. And Pélagie, you have created this beautiful work that we are going to look at in images in a few minutes. You have created this beautiful work called The Missing Link that you first created for the Castle Documenta in 2017, I believe. So this is a very expensive, multi-layered work, and I would really love for you to speak about the genesis of the work and how it came to be this wonderful piece.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, so The Missing Link is a collective excavation of different archives in the installation that relieves that the missing link is the decolonization of education. The excavation was through the archive of the Code Noir from 1685, the puppets caricature from the Munich Museum, the manumission contract from the Temple of Apollon in Delphi, the photo from Dr. Peter Magubane on the Soweto, a children's revolt of the 60 June on 1976, the visit to the Nelson Mandela House, the Hector Peterson Museum in Soweto, the workshop I did with the student of Kassel on the Code Noir, and with the remains of the Second War ceramic borrowed from the city of the museum, among the others. So it was a work that I did with a lot of people, through a lot of conversation, through a lot of visit. The missing link is a concept born from a dream in IROC's foundation and in the Cradle of Humankind near Johannesburg in South Africa. In a dream, a skeleton appeared to me as an hominide teacher. She is the smiling stone. She said, "You know, even though you can go on the moon, if the eradication of the race ideology does not disappear, the world will wear the same clothes as a torment." This is the missing link, the decolonization of education. The smiling stone appeared to me as an emblematic fictitious figure, an allegory of a large-scale discovery, of a female hominid species that liberates a traumatic past and carries a new era, decolonization of education and teaching. She is the Homo species, the Homo sapiens teacher of the 21st century. This vision came from different sources of documentation on apartheid and my visit to Memorial Site in Soweto. My encounter with the Soweto's historical data triggered a radical awareness of the evolution of mentality in the chessboard of the world, increased racial discrimination, sexual discrimination, xenophobia, dehumanization by economic superpower, and the urgency of reforming education. How to return that tragedy of Soweto, the sacrifice of those children who carries an ideal for us. After a long time of reflection, I developed my statement for this project of the missing link. How might education contribute to purge from the consciousness that there exist no other beings, but that the birth of life is a value in itself, that every human being has a right to a cradle. The concept of the missing link, decolonization of education, is a work in progress. And the line of research that is focusing on writing the history, appropriate spaces of expression with new contemporary codes, to translate a mode of writing whose forms become a collective new map of an immaterial collective history as a movement. It also involves the deconstruction in progress of the significance race, gender, power in the social political space is articulated in a quest to build myths, to reconnect with a social life. The excavation of different historical archives and memorial sites reflect the urgency to link all the archives in order to build the library of the world. This is my wish.
You speak about the decolonization of education, and this question of education is really central to your piece, is central to the place where we are sitting, and I think the quote you mentioned is really one that I love, you know, about
Yeah.
how might education contribute to purge from our consciousness what we have learned before. And I think that's something that I realized even more while I was preparing this exhibition, is how the educational system in our country has really failed us as a society by completely abdicating this fundamental mission, which is to teach further generations how to repeat the errors of the past. And the work of Ibrahim Mahama, which is on the facade of this school, is really about that, this sort of complete silence, this monumental silence, this huge hole that we have in our system, in our education system, in the way we have been educated in this country. And so I wanted to see how you also place a lot of hope on the younger generations. And so I really wanted to ask you how you see, first of all, this practice that you have, on a regular basis with students, with young people in your own artistic practice, and then how you see the roles of new generations, both African descendant but also European descendants in our common future.
So I didn't know if I want to see the thing with African descendant and European descendant. Because in my mind, since I practice my artwork, I am crossing an immaterial country. And this is what I would like to share with you, is that more you practice an art, even what is the material, more you discover yourself and more you can kill the fear.
That's a beautiful, kill the fear is a beautiful way to put it.
Because you push the border, because you go ahead and you traveling somewhere, and you traveling also with the hope and it's a kind of regeneration.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so what I would like to tell to the young generation is to learn about, not repeat the mistake that we did as an adult. And I would like to tell them that it's important to experiment, is to practice the experimentation, and and then to have the courage to be in disobedience, in the way that is important to have their own sense of criticism. And for that, it's important to learn, and to learn through the archive. And also, to link also the effect of the reality of the history, to link them and to mix them to find their own language to experiment the life. What I would like to tell to them that the past is not something who is old, but the past is the present. And to very experiment it, that all of the temporality that we learned, it's a mechanism that we need to deconstruct today, because we are in urgency to create a model of a world where there is a relationship more ethic and durable.
Beautiful. You've adapted the missing link for this exhibition. One of the things you did was to show archival images from the Belgian Congo, from situations of education, of class setting. And I was curious to hear about you, Sammy, because you mentioned at the beginning of a conversation an amnesia that was present also in the Congo. And I was curious to know, because you were born and raised in the Congo, if you perceived the same sort of perpetuation of a colonial system of education in the Congo, and could it be that it participated in that amnesia that you perceive when it comes to, history in the Congo? Would you say that both our societies on each side of the sea are suffering maybe from something similar?
I definitely think that they are both suffering from something similar, but then the contexts are playing, or can be approached differently in a way. Where in Belgium, I can see it as a propaganda that has been really made in place in order to make people believe in this idea of civilization, but also this kind of racial consideration of being white and being superior in a way, something like that. But then in Congo, I kind of have this idea of that the amnesia can be felt through maybe the failure of the independence somehow, or even the failure of our ancestors in this meeting with Europeans in a way, and that can also come from far away. It can start from the 15th century or something, and with the slaves and all this kind of. And this is something even like Mudimbe is saying in his writings, where he's talking about a sort of a silent that were part of, for example, the parents that were like educating them during the colonial period, that they were not saying anything, and they were believing in the father who was in one side, the church, and on the other side it's also the working place and the salaries and the place where they could live in a way, and the way that they had to also forget about their customs or even culture in order to adopt and to be civilized or evolve in the society in a way. And then comes this period of independence, which didn't really went far, and then all those kind of trouble that we went through, and then we were under a dictatorial regime with Mobutu, knowing that it was also under the Cold War, and it was more strategic as a space, So I think that sometimes you can find people in Congo that are, when I was really young, during 80 or actually during 96 or something like that, people we're talking about, comparing the colonial period and the 90s, where we were under this crisis period. People were preferring to be in the colonial period because they could have, they could get access to work and have their salaries and send their kids to school or something like that, and that all this, the government that came after the colonial, they destroyed everything. But then we can also think about, and I found it's a bit disturbing, because all the time that when we start to speak about Congo or that space, I would say, then it all starts with the colonial period. Mm-hmm. It's like there's nothing that happened before the colonial, and it becomes like the colonial is the beginning of everything in a way, and it's a sort of like it's a restriction in a way, and so I'm really concerned about
that we need to go find the roots of things. Before.
Of course, because coming back to what Mudimbe is saying about the invention of Africa, because all the borders and all the 54 countries that we have been invited during the colonial period.
I think that's something that definitely links with the work of Pélagie, to go further in the past and try to find these missing links, and not thinking that it always started, as you say, at the arrival of European, or that the reasons for what we're living today are farther remote. That's very interesting. You've started to speak about ancestors and forefathers. And now I would like to transition from this idea of transmission and education that we have spoken about with Pélagie to speak about the idea that's present here in your work, which is commemoration. And you present two works here in the Bram Pavilion, where really most of the works there that I've selected for this place are really about that, about the idea of commemoration, about monumentalization, about the violence that we very often have in monuments, old and new. And one work that you present in the Bram Pavilion is very suggestively entitled The Other Memorial. And so I wanted to ask you if you could speak about it, about again how this work came about.
Yeah, it came from what you've been mentioning at the beginning about double consciousness, and this is what. So I was talking about the work that I did in Lubumbashi while I was in residency at the Hedendaagse, but then all that I could see in the city was those colonial monuments, of course. And then at a certain point, I discovered the Sacré-Cœur in Liège, which is this memorial that was constructed just a few after the First World War, so it was like in 25, where they decided to build this church and also to create different monuments as a tribute to those different allies who were part of the First World War. Then I thought that it was really interesting for me to work around this notion of the First World War for many reasons. One is that, of course, the way that the First War or those wars are already always presented, it's like conflict between European countries. But it has also an underground story which is connected to those colonies in a way. So you have in 80-85 where those countries or those colonies are in a way divided, includes those in Africa. And then the first World War, it's around all those colonies because it's a kind of competition between those metropoles that are kind of fighting between them, and it's all about those colonies. And then after the First World War, you can look at Africa that the map changed. In a way, and especially like we can talk about Rwanda and Burundi that was annexed just after the First World War, or
that came under Belgian domination after the First World War. Yeah.
So for me, I wanted really to address this topic of the fact that this First World War was really connected to the colonial history, but also to the economy and those colonies in a way, and especially. When it comes to Belgium and Congo, it's really how those stories are connected, even though in the large way of presenting it's not. What's the or the way that I mean, there is an absence of the Congolese presence, or even the Congolese interest in terms of mineral resources and all this stuff. So this is one of the things, and I thought that it was also interesting to see that the church itself, so the Sacré-Cœur actually, I mean the cupola actually is made of like more than 23,000 kilos of copper coming from Congo that was in a way like exported and brought here in order to build the cupola of the. So, and then there is a link between the Catholic in Congo and, when it comes to the education, to all this colonial system itself. So you have a religion that played a big role in a way, and on the other hand, you have the industry, all the colonial administration. So for me, it was really interesting to start from this idea of how can I bring together mineral resources, the religion, and also the colonial administration together, and show as a system of occupation in a way. So this is where I started to work with the mineral resources, actually the copper, as a link between the pre-colonial period or the pre-colonial knowledge, which actually you can see those scarifications that are part of ethnographic archives from the Middelheimmuseum. And then, of course, the link with those archives is really the way that you can see that those pictures tells more about the otherness, I would say, than the knowledge behind or the intention behind those clarifications. So I decided to crop and really to focus on those clarifications as traces of knowledge, as traces of knowledge, as traces of political and social. I mean, I would say. What's the word, like organization, like in terms of organization. And I wanted to really, to kind of transfer it on those copper plates in order to really kind of show the tension around the economy, which is actually mineral resources in a way. So this is where I made this first sculpture, actually, where I wanted to bring back around this interest, this colonial interest, to bring back also ancient knowledges in order to say that they are not forgotten, they are part of our lives. So, and they should be, not really just remembered, but it's also activated in a way.
You mentioned, the title of the work is The Other Memorial. The question of memory is really one of the core of your practice ever since you started as a photographer, and of course, since last spring, the idea of whose memory is being honored in the public space, what to do with colonial monuments, how to transform the public space, has really been have created heated debates. And I know that you are opposed to the idea of counter monuments, and I wanted to ask you how you see your differing from that, especially the other memorial. How do you see it as being different than something that would counter anything else or other monuments that we have in Belgian cities?
Yeah, but there are two things. Is that, and as I said since the beginning, that I started to work on the colonial history when I was in Lubumbashi, and because I realized this need to really deal with that, and this came also with, I would say, by accident in a way, that discovering those archives while I was working with architects or historians, and that in a mission of kind of creating a Congolese patrimony or colonial heritage in a way, and then came questions around. Are we sharing the same heritage between colonial and those who are living in Congo? So for me, it was really a context and also a lake that have been driven, and I found that we need to know where we're living and what happened and what happened. Here in terms of urbanization, in terms of all the hierarchy, in terms of language. So I found it's like as an artist, those materials were very rich, and they are, and people need it in Congo. So and then on the other hand, there is this. All this decolonization and all this, I mean, even the art markets starting to be interested on people working on the colonial history or doing research or something like that. So, just to say that I'm really interested in working really on the human level, like, and not really refer to what can be said as actuality, like what is just,
Of course.
But actually, it's really that things are connected in a way. So this is the way to avoid it. And this is why I don't know what to say about I'm not here to kind of propose a counter history, but it's something that we need to build together.
Of
in
course,
a way.
and maybe a more interesting way to put the question would be that you have started to make interventions in public spaces. I'm thinking of the pieces you have shown recently in front of the Grand Palais, for instance. And you will create a piece for the public space of Antwerp that will be inaugurated this fall. And so maybe it's more interesting to look at it about how is your thought process when you actually create a work for a public space in a city like Antwerp. How did that came about?
How the idea to create, but actually it's a commission, I would say, for sure.
Of course, I know it is. But I'm interested in your thought process.
Yeah, just talking about, no, you're right. I mean, Antwerp has a long story with Congo, in a way, and knowing that there is this harbor where all people were coming and goods and all the stuff, in a way. So I wanted to really work with this connection to the harbor and the river, the ocean, and the Congo, you know, as a place of encounter, and through research with my collaborator Estelle, we also found that there is a mayor of this city who said in one of his sentences that if you want to know the world from Antwerp, you need to put your hand to drown your hands into the sea, so you can connect to the world. So I really liked this idea that the sea connects, and how to deal with the other, which because with not only the propaganda or the amnesia, but there is this idea of ignoring the other that came also with all this colonial process, in a way. But on one side you have this ignorance or an action of ignoring, but at the same time there is a transformation of everything that comes from Congo into something else. You know, it can be from Art Nouveau to, I mean, you were saying that we are in a school with all these woods coming from Congo, but nowhere, you know, you need to know. And there's a kind of like, consuming, but without naming, in a way. So I wanted to start from that perspective and really to try to name things and to connect. So actually, it's really working on a level of using tools that can bring to life memory that we have in common. So, and one of the elements that I've been interested in actually, it's the Lukasa, which actually it's a mnemonic board from Luba's people in Katanga, actually. So the Lukasa, it's a mnemonic board that is used to kind of contain memories of ancestors and also memory of kingdom in a way. Like transposing it here, it could be like, how can we celebrate this encounter, this encountering with all these complexities?
It is a beautiful idea to bring this instrument of, you know, Luba, memory and knowledge, and actually to bring it here as the new systems of knowledge to speak about history. And I think it's a beautiful idea to try to link both. Wouldn't it be a wonderful project to actually try to look back at history together and discuss it together with all our different systems of knowledge and memories? You have another work called Untitled, which also refers to, you know, the raw material with copper, but you weave in this piece of even, you know, additional ideas in relation to trauma, the trauma of soldiers of the First World War, of the soil, of how even, you know, the flora, the vegetation actually also links Europe and Africa. And I wanted to, if you just could tell us a little bit more about this work, and also you, with both these works, you show an interest in the First World War. And I also wanted to ask you, what is it that you find it at that episode in history that you think is particularly interesting too?
I mean, there are a lot of elements, of course, in the Untitled work itself, but like since I started to work with archives, and as I said before, like all those colonial archives tend really to inform about the colonial process itself. So I started like progressively to kind of just use those what I kind of call it. It's a kind of sort of I don't know the name in English, but it's like a dialectic, like a way of
Dialectic.
yeah, it's like a dialectic, a colonial dialectic, as an element that I can all time try to shift. I mean, the meaning by bringing, just as I said with Luber's mnemonic devices, but just bringing other way of telling stories. So it's like confronting two devices, actually. So one is a colonial one, and the other it's a local language or a local knowledge, so bringing them together and try to find out how it can be disturbing, because it doesn't really merge together somehow from one side or the other in a way. So, and this is, I made an artist book with so anyway, so I made an artist book which is called actually Vocabulaire with S, so it's like plural. And it's all started from this idea of how to create a collective memory, you know, and how in my practice I can start to by shifting meaning, I can start to create a certain vocabulary that can, by combining elements together, they can start to become also another dialectic, a more hybrid, I would say, in a way. And vocabulary, it really refers to this first book that was published in Katanga in '64, and that was during the period when Katanga was seceded from the rest of the country. So there was also this propaganda of creating the Katangese identity. And during that time, they published a book by an unknown author, but he was mentioned as Yav, actually. So it's a kind of, and it's called Vocabulaire de la Ville d'Elisabethville, where you have collected memories coming from a domestic who were working for white or soldiers. So it's really a vocabulary made by Congolese, by Katangese, in order to kind of create a story, a memory of the city and the country, the way that it was. Like from the beginning till now, so then it's '64. So I found it really interesting because it's all combination of oral stories, actually, or oral story transmitted from generation, or even just some information that are quite correct in a way. But this speculation by combining different sources of stories, I found it really interesting.
I like this idea of creating new vocabularies. Very often, when we speak about what we speak, I very often have a frustration with the words that are available to us to speak about that. And I think that we actually need new word, because of course words cover certain ideas, and very often they are just too tight, or they don't really designate what you want to talk about. And I think that this idea of creating new vocabularies is actually really, really essential for the future as well. When I started to work on this exhibition in 2019, I believe, we were 1 year away from the global tide of Black Lives Matter. And of course, all the artists in this exhibition have been working on, post-colonialism and these questions for a very long, long time. But of course, this new event, this global event, has really bring maybe not a different color, but an additional color to all these questions. And of course, it has, especially in Belgium, it has revolved a lot around the questions of monuments, of memories, of course, of the violence of the police towards people of African descent. And I was curious to hear about what were your thoughts about this, about how this moment, this event has impacted the way we talked about these questions here. Does it give you hope, or do you find it actually makes the discussion even more complicated? I was just curious to see how you see also the audience receive this work after this moment.
Concerning what's happened and with the conscience of the Black matters in the world, I would like to say that I find it's frightening that in the 21st century it takes a Black man dying in the front of the cameras for the world opinions to react. I was quite shocked that we need that. Mm-hmm. I found the lion silence that cultivates racism rather disturbing. That's why I think that education and art as an expression have a primordial role to play, because we work on the prevention. This is what I think, on the prevention and the causes of violence and trauma. We can see some effect, but they are still timid because institutions are afraid to pursue the effort. It is the artist, the militant, the activist, the intellectual, the civil society, and the courageous people from the institution who continue. But what changes is that this drama has been seen collectively. So about the hope, it depends if now they will have a justice about what's happened. Mm-hmm. Because if there is no justice and no reparation, we are always going in the same mistake. So I'm thinking about these movements, I think it's make like on the shock. Mm-hmm. But we need to be in this on the shock every time, each time, at every instant, because the racism is systemic.
Mm-hmm. Sammy?
So we have a lot to do everywhere, in every place.
Pélagie speaks about a shock wave. How would you describe this moment of Black Lives Matter? Does it have, in your opinion, does it have any impact, or has it created a different environment in Belgium in particular, around questions of colonialism, around questions of everything we've been talking about?
I think that I mean the condition of Afro-American in America, of course. I mean, and they have been like working a lot around creating their memory, but also working with archives a lot, and also working on their condition and documenting it in a way. And I think that you have also the same studies like in UK with Stuart Hall, mm-hmm. where you have a lot of elements about how to educate also like Black people, and also to kind of claim their presence and also their contribution mm-hmm. to the society itself in a way, which is not actually the case in Belgium or even in France, mm-hmm. and I think that it's work that is needs to be done. So, but I don't think that it's all connected to the Black Lives Matter. I mean, each context is kind of very different, mm-hmm. one from another. And again, it shouldn't be just about race. It's really about, you know, like how do we build a society, and how do we recognize, I mean, the value of everyone, because it's all about that. And you know, you have some who has opportunities and others who doesn't really have anything, and they are part of society. I mean, it's all about, you know, how do we create a balance, you know, where everyone can enjoy of being part of. And of course, I mean, like in Belgium, you do have, I would say, people like Afro-descendant who still have ancestors or families in Africa or in Congo. And there is this kind of going and back that is still possible. It's kind of different from Afro-American, who, in a way, they've kind of been from centuries disconnected, and you know, so I do believe in Pan-Africanism more than just. I mean, I think it needs to be thought differently in a way. But and of course, the situation that happened, and of course, I mean, the Black Lives started since 2013. So it's only. We shouldn't connect it directly with what happened.
It should be recognized. It's much longer.
As
Pélagie said, came to worldwide prominence.
Of course.
Terrible images that we were forced to watch. One of the ambitions that has been at the core, at the heart of this exhibition, was really to create a dialogue between the different, you know, segments of Belgian societies, to also address the populations of African descent in the city of Antwerp, something that, you know, cultural institutions or art institutions not always do, and also, I think, for the Middelheim, an opportunity to reflect upon the composition of their own collection, you know, of diversifying actually, and address a different kind of, and show also a different kind of art. So it really brings me to the question about how you see your work being, you know, received here in Belgium, and if when you create, you actually have an audience in mind to which you would like your that you'd like for your work to reach.
So I am addressing this work for everybody, because it's a very archaeological and collective excavation. And I also involve the historian, because I am very disturbing by the silence of the historian in this time with very the time that we need to thinking about the gap of the teaching of the colonial past. And when I did a workshop last year, one of the students told me, okay, we will decolonize with why, with what, with what. So, and the teacher was there also. So now I think that the time is there to really involve everybody, and to put this topic in each field of the society.
Sammy, an audience in mind when you create, or how do you see your work being received in Belgium in general, or received in general, not only here?
But that's for sure that I'm not just working for Belgium.
Exactly. That's why I corrected what I said.
No, I mean, since the beginning, when I started to work on the archives, the main idea, of course, was really to deal with the social amnesia, as I was saying, but at the same time also to really concentrate to the fact that from mineral resources point or from the exploitation perspective, that there are a lot of connection with the rest of the world in a way, and which has been ignored, and I've been really pushing in that way in terms of connecting those stories that have been for decades, for centuries in a way, disconnected through a propagandist or under propagandist purpose, and even the racial issues in a way. It's been also a construction. And when we start to speak about the slavery itself and the way that the black bodies were used in a way, and this construction of the other or even the savage, and it's all about this construction. So, and I think that it's I needed really to focus on to find a way to go over all those considerations, and also, but at the same time, to highlight those facts of the way that communities or politicians or even communities have been creating way of considering the other, and how it goes through a process of construction or invention. And as long as we understand that, we can also revert the process in a way. So I think that there are a lot of elements. We can talk about uranium that was used for the first bomb. We have caoutchouc, like a rubber. We have a lot of elements that connect Congo, of course, with the rest of the world, and through even like intellectuals such as Fanon talking about Congo, or Césaire, and you have Raoul Peck. We have a lot of elements that proves that we are connected to the world. So this is an agenda that I've been pushing in a way, but also creating a kind of another way of reading history, not only through confrontation, but also through learning also from what I'm encountering. And I think that these are kind of ouverture that I'm providing, and I'm also receiving a lot from art historian, and ethnographer or anthropologist that I'm working with. So yeah.
I think you mentioned Césaire, Fanon, Raoul Peck, and I was really interested in what you mentioned about what happened in this class with the student asking, what do we decolonize with? And I think it's really a beautiful way, as we are reaching the end of this discussion, that all the tools that we need to do that have been around for 50, 60 years. We have an amazing literature, we have authors, and this is a question we actually also received from students when we made that this presentation last week at another university. And it really speaks to this problem in putting on the side, in not teaching what's need to be taught, because all these instruments have been there for so long. And this is also, of course, what the work of Zaya Romani speaks about in the second part of the school here, is that these systems of knowledge, brilliant literature, brilliant minds, have left all the instruments for us to actually do that, but now we just need to use them for society at large. I would like to wrap up with a question, now that I think that you've had a tour of the exhibition. What is another artist or an artwork that you particularly liked, and you're not allowed to mention your own? and then what do you hope the visitors to get from the exhibition? Pélagie, would you like to start?
Okay. So I will link my work with the ones from Ibrahim Mahama, because the constant questions of the trade and capital through these materials as a timeline challenges me. The body as merchandise and architecture mixed up as a vertical ideology to be deconstructed is a massive question that opens up new narrative, and and brings also another way to see the art. So what can I say to the visitor? It's a lot. It's not so lot, but I have some thoughts that I would like to address to them as a little statement. It's time for action, responsibility, and courage, and the courage to accept the changement by integrating paradoxes, opposites, and complexity to enter to the present. Examination and self-criticism can be initiated on colonialism and one, the transmission of history. It's clear to me that we will have to work on the causes that generate the colonial and the racial issue. From an educational perspective, it's necessary to develop a plan that will help to learn, reflecting on the impact of those tragedies in today's world through new teaching format. Thank you very much. And I encourage to all of people to just take a little courage and to have a little, to find or to participate with a little contribution to make the change.
Sammy, do you have one piece in the show that you particularly like or resonated with you? And what would you like visitors to get from the exhibition?
I mean, I think that all the artists are really interesting. I'm quite sure.
That's the diplomatic way.
No, because I've seen their work, and some of them I know actually, and I've been also working with them, you know. But in this case, I feel, I feel more close to the Angela's Ferreira's work, because I really like this process of kind of really, it's like cropping the architecture and transposing it by also bringing it into a certain narrative that also includes this kind of modern knowledge with workers who black workers actually, who've been part of the process of the modernization of the country. So I think it's kind of really interesting. I know I've been like following the process, and there is a song that she is bringing also this song of miners that I found really, really disturbing, and it's things that you don't see in those colonial archives in a way, but it's kind of moving.
Two great choices.
Really interesting. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Sammy Baloji, Pélagie Gbaguidi, for having sit with me today, and thank you, of course, to all the 15 artists, amazing artists who were kind enough to participate to Congoville. I really encourage everyone to come and visit and to enter in this fascinating, difficult, but very rewarding dialogue about our shared post-colonial history. Thank you.